let's jump into our recap um, of the Mighty Nine Reunited, Reunited Part 1. Do you want to kick us off on this one?
I would love to kick us off on. Now we do, by the way, the recap always does get cut out as like a separate video. So if you're watching just the recap, click the link below in the comments or in the description. It'll give you the full discussion of the episode, which by the way, we don't know what you thought of the episode. But yeah, I'll handle the first half of the recap for a bunch of characters I never heard of before.
Yeah, you better pronounce everything correctly.
So, and Will, please just jump in and help me when I'm like drowning. But
yeah, I got you.
So the story takes place 6 months after the end of Campaign 2, after the fall of Cognusa and the destruction of Lucian. Who these people are, I don't know. But point being, it's about 6 months later. The party has, it seems like even though they've done really meaningful work, they've done so in a bit of, not in hiding. They haven't gotten the recognition that Vox Machina has gotten. And I'm not sure if that was intentional or not. But besides the fact, it's been about 6 months and everyone sort of has splintered off to their own shenanigans. So the story first opens up with Veth, who's in Nicodranus, and Veth is putting on I think of it as like a summer camp, but it's basically this camp for Wildmount wildlings, and people come from all over to learn all sorts of camp-like skills. It's near the water, so they also learn surfing, and Veth is basically getting ready to welcome their new crop of people who are coming. And one of the funnest things about this camp, other than the fact of their T-shirts with their motto "Wild Out," which typical Sam, so good at these kind of things. It's totally free, and it's actually funded by a mysterious benefactor who Veth admits she's basically laundering money for this person. An amount of money gets sent to Veth, and then they use what they can for the camp, and then they send it back clean.
Yeah, from the gentleman is the benefactor.
Thank you. Oh, is that actually a character?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought he was just saying a gentleman. Okay, yeah. The gentleman, excuse me. Also, there is Luke, who is Veth's son,
Yes.
maybe?
Yep.
Okay, great. Who Luke is trying to like learn his own like rogue-like thing. So there's this funny dialogue of Luke being like, yeah, like when people go back to like their cabins at night, that's when I'm supposed to sneak around and see what they're doing. And Veth's like, maybe respect their privacy. And Luke's like, but isn't that like when I'm supposed to do it? And he's like, well, let's just do it like in very, I'll let you know when it's time to sneak and when it's time to respect people's privacy. And then there is, I think it was Veth's husband, Yeza?
Yep.
Okay, Yeza, who has their own shop. And the funny thing that Matt mentions is that it's been open for about a month. And there's been a grand opening 3 times now, which if you've ever run a business is actually very typical of starting a new business. So all that to say, all the kind of the camp shenanigans are coming together. The story leaves Veth in Nicodranus and goes over to the Cobalt Soul in Zadash. And it is where Beauregard is finishing a long day's work. And there's this really funny scene where Beauregard's like kind of getting off the clock, and a person comes up to her and she's like, I'm off the clock. Like, leave me alone. Very much done with working the day. So much so that Liam O'Brien actually jokes like, are you in character yet? Are you role playing yet? Or are you just done? So anyway, Bo goes home to her. I don't know if they're wife or just partners. I don't know if there's marriage really, but her and Yasha are Yasha's kind of being the homemaker and has put together this really great meal. Has been getting advice from their neighbor Martina Stewart on great new recipes. Yasha loves Martina. Bo is like totally done with Martina. Is like, oh, you're still here, great. And they're neighbors, so there's kind of like a little bit of that going on, kind of like suburban lifestyle going on. And basically, they're just kind of like a cute, perfect couple. Like Yasha's really encouraging Bo. They're sharing about their day. They talk about how Yasha is tending to a garden that Caduceus is helping her put together. And they're like, yeah, life is, they share wine, and it's like, yeah, life's pretty good. So leaving there, we move over to a ship near the Swavane Islands. And this is the Ball Eater, which Jester corrects Matt that it's actually called the Nine Heroes.
Yeah.
And it's Jester, Ford, and Kingsley who are working on a trade route off the Menagerie Coast called A Stone's Throw. And there's some really funny dialogue where, like, Kingsley mentions, like, well, if we're called the Stone's Throw, then doesn't that mean we've only gone like a little bit as opposed to like actually successfully trading and like moving people's stuff? And they're like, well, we're workshopping it. There's Orly, who is the navigator of the ship, who is asking Captain Ford about which way to go. There's some funny dialogue there. And then Jester, as an aside, tells Ford, hey, you should have more confidence, and like tell Orly, like, hey, where do you think we should go? This is what I hire you for. And basically they talk about, you know, their crew and what they're doing. And Ford mentions there's about 10 people on the ship entirely. We leave there. We go over to Rexentrum, to the Soltris Academy, where in a classroom, I keep want to call him Orem. Caleb is finishing a guest lecture in this classroom. And in very typical Liam O'Brien sweetness, has this really awesome like end of speech ad lib where he talks about the power of transmutation and to really think about what transmutation means for you and also how it might change you, which Caleb mentions he was never really asked, or maybe he should have been when he was younger. The gnome who's running the class dismisses, and the gnome is talking to him and says basically like, yeah, it was a little bit of a dramatic speech, but students seem to like it, I guess. Caleb then retires to go to his private practice, which is his small cottage. And it's mentioned that he also, in his spare time, mentors students who've been rejected or haven't been accepted to the Soltris Academy. And that's what's happening with him. We go back to the Nine Heroes, the ship with Ford, Jester, and Kingsley, and there is a massive storm coming from the north. And Ford, following Jester's advice, says something along the lines of like, yeah, Orly, what do you think we should do? Where should we go? And Orly basically says, this storm's coming very quickly. Like, we should probably batten down the hatches. It's around this time that Ford feels a cold sensation. And in fact, as the storm hits, he feels incredibly unsettled about what's happening. And as a massive, huge wave crashes onto the deck, Kingsley spots the head of what turns out to be a storm giant in the water of the ocean. Panic ensues. It's like there's a dude in the water. He's big. He's real big. And as a splash of a wave crashes onto the ship, Ford sees a large glowing yellow eye, the eye of Ukatoa, who says, I found you. Scions rush up onto the deck. A mage comes into combat as the storm giant begins to climb up onto the ship. Combat ensues. You can just know that pretty much everyone rolls terribly, really, for the first half of this episode. But some of the important things that happen, Kingsley immediately is fighting one of the Scions. Ford flies up into the air to kind of see the battlefield. Jester is going to run up to the Storm Giant and cast Inflict Wounds at the 7th level on the Storm Giant. And then she's going to get actually smashed by the other hand. In fact, Jester takes so much damage that she actually gets knocked unconscious. And then the mage who came into the combat, came onto the ship, basically says something along the lines of, where's the traitor, where's the key, which is a clue to Ford as to what they're looking for. He flies down, revives or heals Jester with cure wounds, and then basically says like, I'm sorry, like I have to do this. Into the bag of holding, pulls out the cloven crystal. What is that? I don't know. But pulls it out and basically hands it off to the mage after the large storm giant basically says, give it over and we'll spare you. So he hands it over. They're like, deuces, see you later. And then as they're leaving, the storm giant, punches his fist up through the ship, destroys the 9 heroes.
Not cool.
Yeah, not cool. Kingsley has a boat in a box, I guess. Pops up this little rowboat. Everyone climbs in. They do lose someone to the storm. I think I'm jumping actually into your half. So why don't you take it from there?
Yeah. Also, excellent job, by the way, on the first half there for, not being familiar with anything, basically. Well done. All right. So we pick up with the second half with the crew on this, makeshift boat that Kingsley has provided, basically rowing to the nearest landmass. While this is happening, Jester decides to send some messages out. She first contacts Caleb, fills him in on everything that just happened and where roughly they are, believing it to be near the Twinward Isles, being the landmass that they are currently rowing towards. Excuse me. She then sends a message to Veth and basically tells her the same thing. They then make their way to land, set up camp for the night, and Ford basically really quickly catches Kingsley up on everything that's going on with Uk'otoa.
Yeah, thank you for asking, by the way, Taliesin, because I was like, yeah, what? Who's Uk'otoa?
What's happening?
Yeah.
So we cut to Caleb, who immediately whips out his sending stone to Bo. He and Bo have a little sending stone telephone line with each other, and tells her everything that's happening and tells her that he's on the way to come get them. So prepare. He then teleports to the Bernardo household, which is Veth's house, to pick her up first. Grabs her really quick. She says some very quick goodbyes to her family, grabs her things, and then they head out and they head to Bo and Yasha's house by teleportation via Caleb. When they arrive, they briefly talk about, okay, what do we need to prepare? What should we do? Who should we call? Should we call Caduceus? And no one can actually, in this current gathering of heroes, no one can communicate to Caduceus. But Yasha's like, oh, wait, I can. And this is kind of an inside joke from Campaign 2. We'll probably talk about it a little more in the discussion. So she tries to contact Caduceus, but doesn't hear anything back. So the 4 of them gather together, and Caleb teleports them as close as he can to the Twinward Isles. But he's only vaguely familiar with this place because he's never actually been there. He's just seen it whilst traveling in the past. So because of that, the teleport is a bit riskier than it would normally be. And as he does it, everyone takes force damage as they're kind of like shunted through the ether. And they actually fall into the ocean about a half-mile away from the actual Twinward Isles. But no big deal. We got some strong swimmers, and Caleb polymorphs into a shark. So they easily make it to the beach where they all reunite. All the Mighty Nine finally reunite, except Caduceus, with hugs and kind of some friendly ribbing before Ford tells everybody the full story of what happened and how they need to race the clock to stop Uk'otoa from being released. Problem is, they aren't exactly sure where the last seal is and where they should therefore be headed. So Ford kind of starts explaining to everyone the dreams he's been having recently and decides to cast Major Image to kind of paint a literal picture of the dream he's been having so everyone can see. Then the party basically deduces, based on these lights, more than likely representing cities or lighthouses, they can kind of figure out where they need to go. And
it's about 45 minutes, I feel like, of could it be this? Could we figure out this way? Or
yep, exactly. But they ultimately figure out that it is. No, you're fine.
I was going to say, including Matt being like, it's on the map, and then finally realizing, oh, it's actually not on the map. Yeah, which is why they couldn't locate it. So
yeah, that was hilarious. But at the end all be all, they figure out that it is the Sirios End Forest, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Is where they need to go. So now with a tangible destination, the crew makes plans to actually get there. But they're like, well, what are we going to do with like our literal crew from the 9 heroes that's shipwrecked with us? So they try to figure that out. But then they're like, oh yeah, wait, we could use Yusa's teleportation circle in his tower and get everybody to Nicodranas, and that'll work. So Jester sends Yusa a message and is like, "Hey, can we use your tower? We're gonna be in and out. Like, you won't even have to talk to us." And Yusa is like, "Yeah, okay, whatever." So they all teleport, including the crew, to the tower. Winsworth is there, who is like Yusa's goblin butler, basically, and he basically leads them immediately out. And the party and the crew are now in Nicodranas, and Kingsley's like, "Hey, we got to make sure the crew is taken care of, like after everything they've been through tonight." So Ford gives Orly 100 gold, and the crew is headed off to the lavish chateau where they're going to get some really nice rooms for the night. Meanwhile, Jester leads the Mighty Nine to her and Ford's place, where everyone takes a long rest. The next morning, the group plans on how exactly they're going to make their way to the forest. Caleb's never been there before. He's never even seen it, so he can't teleport them safely. So there's a lot of discussion about exactly how they want to do it, but they ultimately, well, actually, while they're discussing, Jester scries on that mage from the ship battle at the beginning of the episode to see what they're up to, and she can see that the mage still has the crystal and is kind of traveling through um, the jungle, the forest, with the sea giant behind the mage. The giant actually picks up the mage and puts them on its shoulder. So Jester comes out of the scry, fills everybody in on where she thinks they are. Um, and the group ultimately then decides, okay, let's teleport to the Wyun Gate, and then we'll have Jester, Caleb, and Ford, excuse me, transform into eagles and carry everyone the rest of the way to the forest.
Which, by the way, as someone who never watched, I was like, okay, wait, hold up. Like, you guys can do what now? But anyway, continue.
So that's what they do, and so they turn into eagles, and there's about an hour duration for the polymorph. So after that hour, they all kind of land into the forest. Some being more graceful than others with the landing. A highlight being that Bo hits a 3-point landing, Veth then hits a 3-point landing on top of Bo, and Kingsley hits a 3-point landing on top of Veth.
Yeah.
And Kingsley says, like, as they were flying in on the eagles, he did see the sea giant like in the forest, and that actually the Mighty Nine have kind of advantageous positioning with where they are. Um, so then they're trekking through the jungle, and the first thing they come across is this abandoned camp. And Bo scavenges through and finds a healing potion, I believe, and then like this torn, dilapidated journal. She's able to make out a little bit of the text on it, and it speaks of the sun being dead, an endless source of venomous snakes, a nightmare curse on the stones, and something about the light of M. Like it, the first letter starts with an M, and then the rest is illegible. So they're not exactly sure what to make from that. But the light of M seems to begin their exodus from hiding, and the writer of this wasn't sure when it would stop. So they're like, okay, what do we make of this? Caleb then is leading the next part of the trek through the jungle, and the next thing they come across is this statue partially hidden by the roots of a thick tree. Come to find out, it's actually a carving of the Wild Mother, and they think that her temple is likely nearby. Jester's able to kind of rip some of these thick tree roots out of the way and expose more of the statue, revealing this like jade gem embedded within it. Caleb identifies this gem and finds that it has like this divine essence that brings a blessing of luck, good faith, and goodwill to whoever wields it. Um, Ford then pries it from the statue pretty easily, and it feels warm to his hand. Veth touches it and feels nothing. So Kingsley notices that the statue is like pointing a direction. I want to say it's northwest, and is like, "Hey, trigonometry, we should go northwest." So they're like, "Okay," and so the crew starts heading in that direction. And after a bit, they come across this monkey, and it's kind of hooting and hollering every once in a while. And Jester tries to, bribe it with pastries. Um, so they keep going, and they notice that it's following them. Bo, actually distracted by the monkey, steps into this like this fungus patch, and spores kind of go up and affect the party, causing a few of them to take damage and Jester to get the poisoned condition. Um, Jester then uses, I believe it's the magic mouth spell or something like that, to try to emulate the monkey and leave this emulation like recording basically behind them to see if she can maybe distract. the monkey and or whatever else. They continue on.
I liked that part though, where Matt's like, "Is that what does the spell say it does?" And then Travis like jumped in and was like, "Basically, not at all what she's trying to use it for."
Yeah, classic, right?
So,
Um, so they continue on, and they eventually find what appears to be like ruins in the entrance to perhaps this temple of the Wild Mother. But they can also hear the creaking footsteps of the giant nearby. Um, Beth decides to investigate further, and up some kind of ruined stairs, she does seem to see a pathway that goes deeper into the temple. So she alerts the rest of the Mighty Nine, um, and so they decide to just make a break for it. So they're sprinting for this entrance basically as the storm giant is like crushing through the trees, also arriving on the scene, and that's where the session ends. Um, Episode 1 of the Mighty Nine Reunited. Reunited. I can't say that for some reason.
why is that so hard for you?
I don't know.
All right. Well, if you've made it this far, you've checked out our recap. We want to know what you thought of the whole episode. We're going to jump into our full episode discussion, and we're going to break just very quickly for just a second to bring on a special guest to the podcast who you're going to see join us in 3, 2, 1.